floodgates. Bus came in and unloaded everybody about 2 minutes ago, so I figured I'd wait for everyone to finish filing at least a little bit. If you're just joining us this week or the last couple weeks, I guess I wasn't here last week. Maybe you were here and I wasn't. But we've been doing a series for a while called Understanding the Bible. And so we've been kind of doing a survey of the Old Testament books so far, going over the different sections, the different books of the Bible. You know, how do I understand the prophets? Does the law have anything to do with me? How do I interpret these various parts of Scripture? Oh, but one of my mics is dead. That might be half my problem. We'll get it figured out eventually. But our study this week brings us to Proverbs. And so I'm very excited to study Proverbs. So if you have your Bible, you can be turning there. I'm going to go ahead and open us up in a word of prayer before our class starts, and then we'll dive in. So let's take a few moments and pray here. God, we thank you so much for this opportunity just to be here this morning. The blessing it is to wake up, to enjoy another wonderful day of your creation, to enjoy another wonderful day of life, of health. I know we have some of our number who are ailing and dealing with some chronic illnesses, recovering from things that are going on. And so we ask that you be with those who couldn't be with us, but that we will still reach out to them and comfort them and help them along in their struggles. I ask that you will guide our study this morning, that we will seek to know you better. We will learn something from your word. We will learn something that we can take home and apply to our lives, so that we can grow to be more like Christ and we can grow to serve your kingdom, God, for that's what you have called us to do. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. We'll see if that sounds a little bit better. We may have to tweak it as we keep going along here. So, we'll probably only spend a week on Proverbs. I know we spent a couple weeks with Psalms. Psalms is a bit longer than Proverbs, if you've ever noticed. So we'll probably just cover Proverbs in the 1 week, and then next week we'll move on to Song of Songs. Probably won't spend very long on that either. It's also a pretty short book. But tell me, if there are some lessons that you have heard from Proverbs. Either lessons or sermons, Bible studies, or maybe verses that stand out to you, verses you've highlighted, verses you really like, or that have stood out to you in whichever ways. From the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Yes, I've heard that one before. Is that just one you like, or have you heard a lesson on that before? Both? You heard it in the lesson, then you decided you liked it? That's a good one. From the overflow of the mouth, the heart speaks. Is that right? Did I say that right? Yeah. It's a good one. What else? Yeah. Definitely. God is forgiving. We all make mistakes. Yeah, God is forgiving if we realize our mistake. Yeah, that's a good point. Certainly. Yeah, and so Brendan brings up a good point that most of Proverbs is relating to that, and we've said this before, that all of wisdom literature in a way is about this, but that when you are doing the will of God, that is wisdom. Wisdom is seeking God. Wisdom is seeking God's will. Foolishness is to seek anything else that is not God's will. Proverbs, much like Psalms, uses contrast a lot. Sometimes it's called parallelism. And it'll say in one line what the wise man does and what the fool does, or what a wise person does and what the scoffer does. And we'll talk about what those words mean a little bit later on. But that's an excellent point. What else? What else have we heard or are we familiar with from Proverbs? Yes. So I wanted to begin there. We'll begin there, and maybe we'll come back and see if we know some other ones later on. But we'll start there. That was the first place I wanted to go in my notes anyhow. So if someone, go ahead and read that for us if you don't mind, Miss Brenda. Proverbs 1:7. Let's read the whole thing. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but a fool despises instruction. And so to become wise, to become intelligent, to become knowledgeable in both life but the ways of the world, to succeed, to be able to navigate life correctly, it is to know God, to know, well, it says start, fear God. But of course, we know that phrase, fear God and keep his commandments. And so that evokes, even though it doesn't even have that whole phrase, I think that very intentionally evokes the rest of that very, very hefty phrase from the law. Fear God and keep his commandments. Because, of course, I think if we understand that word fear correctly, there's no fear God and do not keep his commandments, right? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So no, if you're not keeping his commandments, you probably ain't fearing God the way you're supposed to. Probably don't really understand what all this means. So yes, Proverbs tells us really how we should live our life. The main gist is that we should live it in accordance with God's word, which shouldn't surprise any of us. Proverbs, and we'll skip to our little Proverbs slide there, is a collection, or sometimes called an anthology, of individual sayings that offer skill in the art of godly living. Provides wisdom for reflecting God's glory in the details of daily life and one's relationships. And so this is kind of the important thing that might distinguish it from, say, Samuel or Ezekiel as we were studying the prophets, studying the law, studying Moses. If I study Moses, I have to kind of look at Moses' life, look at the principles from Moses' life, look at the examples from his life, and say, well, how does that apply to my life? Proverbs starts out in the general phase, right? It starts out with kind of what sounds like, well, a general proverb. I mean, the very word proverb means like a saying, right? A wise saying, a good saying. And so it starts off kind of general, which means it is practical, but you have to be careful. Because if you look hard enough, you'll find proverbs that almost seem to go opposite directions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So we have to apply them in the way they were intended. There is the proverb, and I don't have this one written down right here in my notes, but train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it. Have you heard that one before? How many parents have learned that that is not a promise? Right? That's different. We read that different. There's times where Jesus and God says, now this is one of the commandments, right? It's the one that comes with a promise. Honor your father and mother, and you will have a long life in the Lord. It's a commandment. It literally says commandment that comes with a promise. Proverbs, train up a child in the way he shall go, and he shall not depart from it. It's a general rule. It's good guidelines. It's certainly strong life advice. Not a promise. And so I want to begin by sort of acknowledging that, this is what we said when we started the wisdom literature section. We read this section of the Bible a little bit different than maybe we do some of the other sections. And that is because these are general wise sayings. And so they're good, they're godly wisdom. Who could ever say wisdom that calls you to follow God is ungodly? But there are parts of it, like that one I mentioned, that if you struggle to raise a child and you do everything you can, you pour your heart and soul to them, and you teach them the right thing, and when they're older, they make their own life choices and they choose to maybe take a different path. Don't go up to, I would encourage you or caution you, don't go up to God with one proverb in your hand saying, well, you told me if I did this, I would, because we know our children got to make their own mistakes, and we could find plenty of verses, perhaps Ezekiel, for example, that says that you will no longer say, the father eats sour grapes and their children's teeth are set on edge, the soul who sins shall die. There was this old law idea that you inherited the sins of your parents, you inherited the righteousness or unrighteousness of your parents. And many times in Scripture we see it says, no, that shall no longer be true. And so when we look at this life advice in the big picture of Scripture, we would see that yes, it is generally true, it is good advice, but it is not a guarantee, it is not a promise. So Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Psalms, these are this wisdom literature. And the main emphasis, as we've kind of already been talking about, is to show that rightly relating to God is first seeking to understand his truth, and then secondly, embracing and obeying that truth. I'm going to turn to Proverbs. We've been sitting here talking about these. Any other passages maybe that you've heard? There's a couple I'm thinking of that I'm surprised haven't been mentioned yet. About Proverbs 31. Ever heard of Proverbs 31 a little bit? Yeah. The worthy woman certainly segues us nicely into the sort of the next section of literature. I think really, depending on some of the older arrangements of the Bible, I think Proverbs 31 is a good intro to Song of Psalms, but we'll get to that probably next week. Yes, and so you mentioned it's listed twice, and really we could find that same idea expressed all throughout Scripture, right? My favorite, probably similar phrase from that is, I believe it's Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? And so you said that there's a way that seems right to us that is folly, because the way of the righteous, the way of the wise, is of course the way of God, the way of God. So yeah, that's the main theme of the book of Proverbs. To rightly understand God, to be in a correct relationship with God, means first seeking to understand His truth, and then secondly, quite simply, embracing and obeying. And so all throughout, this following God's path leads to a blessing, whereas forsaking God's path leads to ruin. And how? So we'll talk about authorship a little bit more later on. But any guesses on, or does anyone know who wrote Proverbs, or who the Proverbs are generally attributed to? Solomon, the most regarded as the wisdom of Solomon. Of course, it was a couple weeks ago we studied that prayer, that major event in Solomon's life. He asked for wisdom. God gave him wisdom. And so Solomon was known for his wisdom. Most of these Proverbs were probably either written by Solomon or written as a tribute to Solomon, certainly under Solomon's kingly authority. And so when we think about the story of Israel, maybe before, during, and after the time of Solomon, it's been a couple months now, but we spent a good amount of time studying those passages, right, the Samuel and the Kings in that section of the Bible. But why do you think this idea that wisdom is following God and foolishness is disobeying God, how might you see that in the context of Solomon's life, or Solomon's reign, and sort of the journey of where Israel was at that time? Maybe I'll start with maybe an easier question. But what is one thing we saw when we studied, say, even the first 5 books of the Bible under Moses, Joshua, and the time of the Judges? We said when the people obeyed God, what happened? They prospered. Things were good. When God said, hey, go conquer Jericho, and I want you to do it in this weird, incredibly strange way, and the people did it, it worked. And then when the people said, that was really good, we must have conquered Jericho by our own power and our own strength, so we're going to go conquer Ai without consulting God, then what happened? It didn't work. And so we've talked about, when we studied the law, and we studied the prophets, and we studied the historical books over and over, that when the people of Israel seem to be doing the will of God, the nation of Israel does well. When the people of Israel seem to be doing the will of God, the people of Israel, the nation as a whole, does well. Again, general rule. We could certainly find people under the reign of David and the reign of Solomon who made mistakes. I mean, that's the beauty of David's life as accounted in Samuel and Kings. I've said that they tell us not just the good things David did, but all his mistakes. But generally, when the nation as a whole is seeking God and is obeying God, the nation as a whole does well. And when the nation stops obeying God, the nation crumbles. When God says, I will give you over to foreign enemies, I will give you over to your neighbors, I will give you over to all of these other powers. And so it makes sense to me that Solomon, existing in this crucial point in Israel's history, would write so extensively about how wisdom is following God and foolishness is not. Before Solomon, people followed God. We call it the United Kingdom, right? Everybody was together. We have that line that it unfortunately comes right before his story, but we have that line kind of repeated in 2 Samuel that said, God gave the king rest from all his enemies. Almost like times were good. Things were good for the nation of Israel. But of course, we know after Solomon, it seems like Solomon spent all this time writing and nobody listened, right? Whether we tie it to David, or we pin it on Solomon, or we pin it on Solomon's sons, somehow all of these things eventually built up. People started getting divided. People started fighting. The nation stopped obeying the Lord. And of course, their way was folly. So that's really the overall gist of Proverbs. Mm-hmm. She's mentioned the godly care for their animals, but the wicked are always cruel. Yes. So you bring up a good point. I threw some of the little notes we'll talk about on the screen. I'm looking at them now. Those might be a little bit small. But there's 4 primary characters in Proverbs: the wise, the fool, the simple, and the scoffer. And I would say the wicked, depending on your translation, is often that one that is translated the fool. But there's 4 main characters. The wise are, of course, those who embrace God's covenant. Fools are those who are opposed to God, but are, well, and I'll clarify the statement I just made. The fools are those who are opposed to God, but are not beyond hope. The scoffer and the wicked are the proud and the arrogant who scorn God's ways. The simple, as often listed in Proverbs, are those who are uncommitted to wisdom or folly. They're easily misled, right? If I think of somebody as being simple-minded, I'm saying that, well, they kind of just get led up into whatever's around them. We've also might describe these kind of people as chameleons. They just sort of blend in with whoever their environment is. They get distracted by whoever their friend group is. They kind of just go with the flow, both positively and negatively. And so Proverbs describes the wise, the simple, and the scoffer. And I would suggest that the wicked fall into that last category of the scoffers. And I point this out because I think it's a good distinction when, even in modern evangelism, in the church, in discipleship, and in all of our sort of different ways of interacting with people as it pertains to growing the kingdom, sharing the gospel. There are those who are wise, and I would say all of us, at least this morning, have made so far, started our day with a wise decision, right? We're here, we're learning, we're studying, we're seeking to know God. That seems like a wise start to the day. It says the wise are those who embrace God's covenant. And then there's, I would say, at least 2 or 3 kinds of people who do not. There's those who do not simply because they have not really been taught, right? They just don't know any better, we would say. And of course, I know legally they say, well, ignorance is no excuse from the law. But I also know in the legal system, no, but it'll get you a lot lighter sentence than defiance. My own teenage experience, not knowing, will get you a lot further than abject refusal to obey. And so the Proverbs describes the simple. And these are people who are just uncommitted. They're probably the people Paul would talk about when he says they are tossed to and fro by every form of doctrine, right? He says they're just not rooted. They don't really have their foundation. When Jesus gives his illustration of the soils, I think it's very similar to the people that are described in Proverbs. That soil where there's just no roots. It got in the dirt a little bit, but it was shallow, there was rocks, and so when the wind came, it just rooted right back up, and they're not strong. There's not a firm foundation. But then the scoffer is one who is proud, who is arrogant, who scorns God's ways. We think about that. That is the one who looks God to his face and says, you know what, I'm going to go my own way. Those are people who've tried to be taught, but they just want nothing to do with it. And I think this is important to read this and make this distinction as it comes to evangelism, it comes to church work, because some of these people are going to be easier to reach than others. And we could have different debates about philosophy and what we should do in ministry and how this and that. But when I look at Jesus, I see that Jesus spent time with people who wanted to know. He spent time with people who wanted to know. When he tells the parables, he feeds the crowds, right? He feeds the 4,000 or 5,000, but he had 12 disciples. Why? Because over and over we see those scenes where he says, well, did I not send out this many, right? 10 were healed. Where are the other 9? He's going to heal as many people. He's going to touch as many people as he can. He's going to reach as many people as he can. But when it comes down to the people that he is going to disciple, some people got to make the decision that they want to learn, right? I know we have some teachers, some people working in the education system. Who would you rather teach? Students who want to learn or students who don't want to learn? Jesus spent his time with people who wanted to learn. That passage says, why do you speak to them in parables? To some it was given, to some it was not given. He's saying you are the ones who are seeking the meaning of the parable. I saw a brilliant commentator read one time. He said we have to acknowledge that some of the parables of Jesus are very confusing. Which means one of 2 things. We'd have to admit that Jesus was really a horrible teacher, and he just said confusing things all the time for no reason. Or he made it where you had to work at it a little bit. He wanted you to think about it a little bit. He wanted you to dig a little bit. There's another passage that eludes me, but it talks about how when you dig in the dirt, if you're only digging in the topsoil, you'll find bugs and rocks and dirt and weeds. But the gemstones and the things worth digging up, you got to work for. You can't just walk down the street and find gold and silver and diamonds lying on the roadside. You got to work for the things that are worth digging up. So the wise are those who embrace God's covenant. There's the simple who simply are lost, we would say. They just haven't been taught. They're uneducated. They're easily misled. And then there is the scoffers, the wicked, those who know the way of God or who've been told the way of God but simply have chosen to reject it. Questions, thoughts so far? Another thing Proverbs does a lot, lady wisdom, lady folly. There's a lot of personification in Proverbs. Those are not real people, right? Those are not actual titles. Those are just sort of a literary device, a way of talking about wisdom, a way of talking about foolishness. The book concludes with the woman of excellence, not necessarily describing any particular individual, but giving general guidelines of what a hypothetical or what a suggested, this idea of a woman of excellence might look like. So, I want to look at the first few verses here, because kind of like how we said Psalms, the first few chapters of Psalms lay the foundation, lay the outline, lay the structure for how the rest of Psalms is laid out. I think just the first few verses, this first section of Proverbs, tells us a little bit and gives us kind of the thesis statement for what the rest of the book is going to be about. Just a side note when it comes to practical Bible study. There's 31 Proverbs. Maybe you have noticed that most months have 30 to 31 days. A very easy Bible study. If you're new to Bible study, if you're studying with a child or kind of a young adult, and you want to introduce them to Bible study, just have them read one proverb a day. One proverb a day. By the time you finish the month, you'll have read the entire book of Proverbs. They'll be excited that they finished a book of the Bible. And Proverbs is a little bit easier to read than Leviticus or maybe 2 Samuel or something like that. As we said, it's general. It can be harder for us to know, like, so I apply this, what are we going with this, what do I do with this? But it's very simple, it's very easy to understand. So it makes for an easy place to start with Bible study if you're studying with someone who just isn't familiar with habitual reading, or like a young child or somebody like that. But if someone could read for us, we'll say Proverbs 1, verse 1 through 4, and then we'll read the second part in a moment. Proverbs 1 through 4. Okay. And then someone read for us 5 through 7, please. Thank you, sir. Hey, Van, could I give this to you? I just realized I started class with both dead mics. That's why no one could hear me. I was wondering what was going on. I'm going to have them fix this. Usually try to get here early enough to set up everything, but I always miss something. So, we read those first 7 verses. We've read Proverbs 1 through 7 a couple different times. If we're looking at, because I said I think this first section of this chapter does a good job of laying the groundwork for the whole book. If someone's reading the first 3, we'll say 4 verses, tell me what you think the purpose of the book of Proverbs is. Just in those first 4 verses. What do you think the purpose of the book of Proverbs is? To increase learning, certainly. Understanding. Wisdom. And we've talked about wisdom. We're probably repeating ourselves a little bit here, but that's all right. That's another thing you'll notice. It will feel a little bit repetitive because some of these are a little bit more simpler truths. They're not very complex. They're intended to be easy to understand, not to be hard. Well, if I was to sort of give, I guess, the traditional 3 points here, I think an easy way of looking at the purpose is to say, to know wisdom, to receive instruction, and to give prudence. Kind of breaks it down really nicely there, right? There's 3 verbs in those first opening lines. To know, to receive, to give. There's the purpose of it right there. Then those who take its instruction to heart will develop this sense for what makes one wise, for what makes one practically intellectually wise, but also what makes one spiritually wise. To know wisdom and instruction, to receive instruction in wise dealing, to give prudence to the simple. Thank you, sir. I like that. See, I never would have thought of that because I tend to think I do, I guess. No joke. And it teaches this, so I'm glad you mentioned that because I think those are very tied together ideas. There we go. Now we're really cooking with gas. How about that? So discipline, or you said teach us discipline, and you said to tell us we don't know everything in the first place. It's just like Mr. Carl read for us, right? Every fool has a way in his own heart that he thinks is wise, but it is folly. If you've been around the block a time or two, you've probably learned that sometimes I think I know what I'm doing, and I'm very, very wrong. I tell people all the time in sort of marriage, relationship counseling type situations that you're going to have moments where one of you thinks one way is right and one of you thinks the other way is right, and you're both very devout, you're very well-intentioned, but you're very strong in thinking that your way of handling the situation is just better. And, I'm not talking about where we're going to eat for lunch. I'm talking about things like what school we should put our kids in. We homeschool them, should we put them in public school, should we move over here, should I take this job, should I not take this job? Like serious stuff. And what I tell people all the time is that if you don't have something you can go to, you're going to fight with each other. You're going to just be pushing back and forth to each other. But if before you get into this relationship, you both agree that we agree on some sort of calibration or some sort of foundation, I'm not saying you're never going to fight, but at least when you do, you are able to look at each other and say, well, we agree on a set of rules here. We can calibrate ourselves. If you have any kind of exacting, precise, either a measuring tool or a torque wrench or a calipers, you got to calibrate them, right? You got to reset them. You got to reset the scale so that it knows what is what. And God's Word is an excellent calibration tool for us. We're still going to have disagreements. And yes, you're going to both be saying, well, I think we should take this approach, and I think we should, and you're both going to think you're right. But you will find, and this has been my experience first and second hand, you will find that instead of fighting with each other, it's more of an easier discussion to have about what we think is right based on some agreements and some foundational direction we both have. And so you said it tells us that we don't know everything in the first place. And I think God's Word does a good job of reminding us that we are humble and we are flawed. And I'll tell you what, if you want to, that's, I would say the first thing I just said should probably be number 2. But the first way to avoid fights in relationship is remember that you are humble and remember that you are flawed, right? Right and just and fair. Yes, so that is probably a little bit of what was meant by discipline. That because I think in our culture, especially in our very modern culture, I think there's this idea that like to be a righteous person is very naive. That to be a righteous person, to be a do-gooder is someone who just like, well, they just don't know how the world works, right? You've probably been in business rooms or business dealings where someone's trying to do the right thing and the boss or a manager or somebody goes, well, you just don't really know how we do things around here. You just haven't figured out how we do things. And what they're getting at is we do things unethically and you need to shut up and learn that we do things the way that make us money, not the way that we think are right. And so the world has this mentality that, no, to be spiritual or to be good or to be righteous, that's foolishness. You're never going to get ahead doing that. No. But Proverbs, and I believe the rest of God's Word, tells us, no. It is spiritual instruction, but it is also righteous, good instruction for this life. That if you attain to these values in God's Word, it will work out for you in this life. And again, kind of like we were talking about the children and the way they should go, not a promise. We know we will face persecution. We know we will have trials. But I believe very firmly from, again, my own experience and the experience of others, that if you have a set of values, you're going to do better in life than the people who don't. You just are. What is that saying from Numbers? Your sin will find you out. Make no mistake, your sin will find you out. And to learn and to have I think one commentary I read said a posture of learning. But I think it means like sort of an attitude, a learner's mindset. I'll give a little bit of a teaser in our sermon today talking about prayer. I mentioned a little bit about how I would never tell somebody you have to do it. This isn't doctrine. But I think it's important that we notice that when Jesus prayed in the garden, Jesus knelt. Because there's something about getting down. You're not telling anybody anything when you're down on one knee, right? If someone wants to interact with little kids, what do? Sometimes you'll bend down, you'll get on their level because you want to just kind of maybe play blocks with them or something or interact with them. Rarely, and I might be speaking out of turn here, but most of the time if you're disciplining a child, you're standing up looking down on them doing this, right? If you're really wanting them to know who you are and who they are, you're going to stand up and you're going to do this. But when you get down on one knee, it's kind of hard to really be proud and full of yourself when you're down there on one knee. And I can't prove it biomechanically and whatnot with our brain and our body, but I think there's something about when we kneel in prayer, I think there's something about our physical body that reminds us that we're to be humble when we do this. We're to remember who we are and who He is. And so that phrase that I read in a commentary, it said a learning posture. I think it talks about our mentality, but there is something about conducting our life in a way that we always have something to learn, that we haven't quite got it figured all out just yet. That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. And I think I've probably talked explicitly about marriages, but truthfully, all this stuff is really any relationship. And I mean, what is life other than a network of relationships with everybody we know, right? Friends, bosses, coworkers, family, kids, parents, all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's exclusive to marriage and those kind of relationships, really any of them.
You know, really think about it. When we rely on the Word of God, it gives us peace of mind.
Absolutely. The peace that passes understanding.
The world is scaring people to death now because you're hearing what man says.
That's true.
Versus what God says.
That's true.
And they're scaring them to death. For sure. Jerusalem has been destroyed before. God destroyed it.
That's true.
The Roman soldiers destroyed it.
Well, in Jesus in His lifetime, right? They were talking about how great the temple is. He said the temple, He said, they'll be taken down brick by brick before you pass from this earth, right?
This is not Matthew 24.
Yeah. But let the wise hear and increase in learning. You mentioned it. Anybody ever have the parents tell them God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason? Wants you to listen more than He wants you to talk. Yeah, I think when we talk about, as Billy said, being ready to learn, sometimes it just if we're talking real practical, sometimes it starts with hearing. Yeah, let the wise hear and increase in learning. It's hard to listen when you're speaking. Good. These are awesome points. And truthfully, that verse right there is why I try to do this kind of format on Sunday nights, why I really like, I would say if I had my preference, I would almost say I like teaching a class than I like preaching a sermon. And this might be controversial, but I don't think most preachers feel that way. And I'll let you interpret why that might be. But I like the feedback. I like things you guys have to say. I like hearing other people's perspectives on verses and passages. Let the wise hear and increase in learning. The one who understands obtains guidance. And so if we seek to know God's wisdom, if we seek to apply God's wisdom to our life, we're going to learn the ways of the world. And so that causes us to reject this cultural mentality that no, to be righteous is naive and to be a good person is just foolish naivety. And the truth is, and this is where I look at the example of Jesus, the example of many of the biblical characters, yeah, life is going to be harder if you're willing to commit yourself to being a nice person or a righteous person in accordance with God's word. It is. I'll acknowledge that. If I get cut off in traffic, it's a lot easier to do things I shouldn't do than it is to just tell them to have a good day, right? I remember one time I was in a heated argument with somebody, and they were telling me how how we were only fighting because I was reacting a certain way to what they were saying. I was like, well, I kind of think you just provided me the definition of fighting. Yeah, I'm upset at what you're saying. That's why we're having an argument. And so learning God's wisdom, I think, very much contributes to not just that posture of learning and not just that discipline for life that we need to have, but it makes, applying God's wisdom to our life makes us the kind of person who is more ready to listen to wisdom in life. And so it's this positive cycle, right? We probably know the people that are arrogant and proud and don't want to hear anything, and unfortunately those are the people who probably need to be taught the most, right? Well, if we're humble and if we're not just listening to God's wisdom, and because we said that the main emphasis of this book is, number one, seeking to understand it, number two, seeking to apply it. And I would suggest that almost the hidden or the implied number three is that if we seek to apply it, we're going to be better at seeking to understand it. We're going to be more ready to hear the wisdom of God. We're going to be more ready to hear the correction we need for our lives. We're going to be more ready to hear that which will make us an even better person, an even stronger person in our faith and in the Lord. I'll talk about three things real quick because I have a note in there that says, see that very bottom line, I'll read these real quick. We just said it was a collection, an anthology of individual sayings. We talked about how the main emphasis of the book was to show that relating rightly to God involves first seeking and obeying His truth, and then secondly, it's not up there, but secondly, I've read that right. First seeking His truth, and secondly, obeying it. Maybe it's a good thing you guys can't read my notes. I don't know how to write notes. And we talked about those four main characters, the wise, the fool, the simple, the scoffer. And I would say the scoffer and the wicked are one person. And I have a note, seeing the gospel in Proverbs. So I would talk about that with just our last couple of minutes. Wisdom, grace, and understanding. So wisdom revealed. God, in all of His grace and mercy, from the beginning of His covenant, He chooses to reveal Himself to us. And so we should appreciate that He has chosen to reveal, whether it's through the law, whether it's through the prophets, whether it's through prophetic oracles, whether it's through Jesus, whether it's through the apostles and through the example of that New Testament church. We should just, at the start, we should be joyful that God has chosen to reveal Himself to us so that we might understand Him. If you've ever studied maybe some of these pagan religions, because when we do this, we have world religions class, we have to look at like Egyptian, some of the cultures that the church grew up in, the Greek mythologies, Egyptian mythologies, other things that were around at the time of Israel, Babylonian mythologies. A lot of them believed in gods that were just like playing games with humans. Like they had these stories about gods who would trick humans just for the fun of it. They believed, and they would sacrifice these people. And I remember reading about this, and I'm like, why are you doing this? Who wants to believe in a God that acts that way? This is horrible. This is not fun. They believed in a version of gods who would trick humans, manipulate them, who would just kind of let you figure it out in life and say, oh, you got it wrong. Try again in the next version you get or whatever. But we have a God who says, no, this is how I want you to act. This is how I want you to seek me. This is how I want you to behave. This is what pleases me. We've talked a lot about the analogy of relationships. What do they tell you? The number one thing in a relationship is communication, right? Again, not just marriage. Any relationship is communication, expectations. Any job will talk a lot about expectations for our role, right? These are the things we want you to do. These are the things we're going to grade you on. These are the things we're going to evaluate you on. People want that. God gives us that. He says, hey, this is what I'm going to grade you on. Don't be surprised when you get there. So wisdom is revealed. Transforming grace. Proverbs outlines the transformative nature of wisdom. We talk a lot about salvation, but I would join that with sanctification. It's not a word we use a whole lot in our teaching. But Paul wrote that believers are to be progressively transformed by the Spirit. That's Romans 2:12, but it's also 2 Corinthians 3:18. That as we behold the glory of Christ, we are continually transformed by the Spirit. And if you were to say, well, how am I transformed by the Spirit? What does that look like? I would suggest maybe Proverbs is a good reading for that. And then thirdly, how many times in his teaching did Jesus say, let him who has ears to hear? Or how many times did he start saying, behold? Behold really just means listen, with an exclamation point at the end. That's really how he said it. Look, listen to what I'm saying. Verily, verily, what I'm saying is true. Listen up, pay attention. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. And so the call to hear and the ability to do so are gifts from God. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Is how John ends every single one of his letters in Revelation, the last book of the Bible. He who has an ear, let him hear. Well, thank you guys. That's our second bell, right? Thank you guys. We'll move on next week to Song of Psalms, and we might cover that and Ecclesiastes at the same time. Actually, let me get you this one. You have batteries?